We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
Давайте, и дастся вам.
与えるとき成長する.
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity. I'm your host, Shannon Cassidy. This podcast celebrates generosity at work, not financial giving valuable time, mutual respect, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Mike Ashcraft, the senior pastor at Port City Community Church, which he helped start in 1999. He's the author of To Be Concluded and My One Word, as well as a children's picture book, The Bright Idea. He married Julie, his high school sweetheart, in 1992. They grew up in Atlanta and relocated near the beach in southeastern North Carolina. They enjoy family time with their two daughters, sons-in-law, and grandchildren. The beach is Mike's happy place, and surfing is the only hobby he needs. What I appreciate most about you, Mike, and it's on a long list of things, is your remarkable ability to teach complex things in a way that makes us think and behave differently. And what I mean by that is to behave better and to be more aligned with who we want to be. Welcome to R.O.G.
So great to be here, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me. And it's just it's a treat to be able to have just spend some time with you and talk about some things that matter to hopefully matter to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for making time. Yeah. And, this podcast is about generous leadership and having participated in your church for the past couple of years, thanks to our son, Ryan, who is a UNCW student. And it's our church home. And I see your generosity of spirit and leadership and the ways that you bring people together. So you're a perfect guest for our podcast. And Port City is celebrating 25 years in October. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. 25, hard to believe, it's like a lifetime.
It is. Yes. I mean, how are you interpreting your success?
Success. Sometimes you wonder if that's what it is. It's like there's all these kinds of ebbs and flows, and it's been very nostalgic because the first run was probably, I always kind of break into seasons. The first 3 years you're trying not to die. And then when you don't, you feel like, okay, I made it. And then the next whatever was just chaos. It was fast. And so it took me a long time to kind of find my footing to be able to say, okay, what's happening and what is, what should be happening? Are we doing things that matter to the mission of our church, that matter to God, or are we just trying to build something big? And all those things kind of go together. But now, and I guess maybe the best way to summarize the question is, it's 25 years. To me, it just feels like it's a mark, and I've tried to really cherish it because it is an important mark. It's a long time, and it's a long time of, my mantra has been long obedience in the same direction. It's a book title from Eugene Peterson. I think the quote's originally attributed to Friedrich Nietzsche. But to just do something for one thing for a long time. And one of our younger staff members, she shared at staff meeting this past month, a few days ago, and she shared with our whole staff. And I just asked her, could you tell about your experience of Port City Church, of both coming into our church, being on staff, and what were the challenges, what were the surprises, what were the things that have helped you kind of take this mission and make it your own? And as she was describing this, I got up kind of at the end, I told her, I said, it's hard to imagine. I dreamed 25 years ago that people would perceive our church in a particular way. And you intersected our church 20 years in, and then almost 5 years later, you're describing what I hoped would happen 25 years ago. And it's that to me is the emotion. It's surreal. It's you're trying to to feel out what this really is. So that's how I describe it. So it's just it's surreal.
What were some of the things that she said?
She talked about our values, which was surprising because we do that in our orientation. We do a lot internally, but we have 4 core values that we use, and it's the acrostic CARD, and it's context, authenticity, relationship, discovery. And she talked about these as though from her own personal experience that she learned that she had a voice. And she's young and she's on a staff and people have been there a long time, and that she learns that her contribution actually matters to who we're becoming. And for someone to come into an organization that's already big and that's already been running and to feel like they don't just have to become a part of the machine, but they actually contribute to what that thing is becoming.
Yeah.
Was just, and it was so nuanced, but so important for people to understand.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think sometimes success is acquiescing or becoming, like you say, part of that machine. Right. And that's how people survive. But the environment is such that individuality is celebrated and can be a contributing factor without people having to modify to fit in.
Yeah. And it's important because the drift is towards the machinery. It's easy to operate. It's easier to know who's in and who's out. You don't have to accommodate much of anything. But this way you have to really see people. And it's been a challenge. Like, I think I wanted the machine because it's, like I said, it's just easier. But I felt like as the more we got into this, the more you realize that even the concept of a church isn't, it's not a system of programs. It's a community of people who have to work together and cooperate together and bring something of themselves in order for it to become what it is.
Yeah.
And that's what,
for sure.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about your mission of reaching people and helping them walk with God. I know we're already diving in, but I think that like the reaching people part of it and that walking with, it's like that's why I think of generosity so much when I witness you and others' leadership at Port City, because you really take that approach of like, how can I creatively find a way to reach the people in a way that they need? And then how can we walk with them? We're not trying to change them. We're really trying to accompany them and equip them, and that's I think what you've created.
One of the things too interesting about reaching, growing up in a church culture, which I did, especially even as our church, and it's relatively large for especially for a smaller town, but everybody assumes that reach is about getting bigger. And I remember years ago, it took me a long time because it's almost kind of when you said, I'm talking about generous leadership and I want to talk about you. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm always generous. Sometimes I feel like, the opposite of that.
That's human.
I know, right? But it does. So, but I remember realizing that to reach people was about the willingness to extend ourselves towards someone. And so what we started talking about, and this has been a really important shift for our church, is that reach isn't a measure or a strategy for how we get bigger. Reach is a measure of what we're willing to care about. And if you're willing to care about people in the like if you're going to reach people in the margins, you've got to be willing to care about people in the margins, and it reveals the things that we're willing to extend ourselves towards. And then the posture is, of course, it's to help. How can we be helpful to you? When people come to me and they want to, ask questions about all kinds of different things or criticize, I just say, how can I be helpful to you? That's the only thing I need to know. And then we'll figure out where to go from there. So it's been real freeing in that sense, but challenging as well.
Oh my gosh, completely. You have said that you don't stand on issues, you walk with people. And I think that's, synonymous with what you were just saying. It's like, some people might come to you to say, what's your position on?
Right.
Or what is your stand, right? So say more about that, please.
Well, I just always say, because that's always, again, it's the expectation that most people have, and there are people who are asking for well-meaning reasons. I don't think it's always
like a gotcha.
There are people who really, and there are important things to say and be clear about. But what I always do is I say, tell me a name and tell me a story, right? It's like, because I want to be able to humanize something. And then we can say, how are we going to approach this person? Because you can have clear convictions on issues, but how you approach a person is going to change depending on that person's experience, where they're coming from, what they're looking for. And it often what it does, it kind of eliminates a lot of people who are just trying to debate stuff, because we're interested in actually helping people. And with that, we've been able to work in so many different areas, I think really effectively, without what I would say without compromising where we are, what we believe, but to actually be able to move in and to be helpful. And to bring something, I always say, bring something better to the world in which we live. And that's been our posture, for the whole time.
Do you have an example of that?
Here's one. So here's what we work with in one of the schools that has a lot of there's a lot of kids who just don't have great home situations. larger minority population. And so we go in and we say we want to be helpful. And one of the things that happens, at least in the church world, is they're like, hey, you're not going to come in here and like, you're going to not pass out Bibles or talk about Jesus. We're like, yeah, we're fine. We're not going to come in and do anything that you don't want us to do. Mm-hmm. And they're usually surprised because they're used to people coming in and saying, oh, if we do this, we're compromising. If we do this, then we're sort of violating our convictions. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying is we're coming in, and part of what we do is we do volunteer sort of relief at lunchtime so the teachers can have a lunch. And for the first little while, it was like, no one's moving. We're sitting there. It's kind of awkward. And a lot of our children's ministry volunteers are part of this. But by the end, a lot of the teachers would just be sitting at a table, and we had the whole student body, and the school kind of trusted us that we were going to come in and not create trouble for them and not do all the things that have typically happened. And so it's that posture to be able to say, how can we be helpful that allows us to enter in. In fact, one of the comments, one of our staff members was telling stories about it, and somebody from the school said, you know, y'all just come in here and do this. What's wrong with you? You know, like you don't really, you don't seem to want, you don't really want anything. Like, what are you trying to do? And it's like, we're really just trying to be helpful and honor the teachers who have a tough job, and it's been a tough season. And if we can be supportive in that in some tangible way, that will be enough. And to really kind of embrace that throughout, again, almost any issue that people are dealing with or facing.
What a great example. Yeah. Thank you. Right off the cuff, right off the dome.
I was having to go, dig deep for that one.
Meeting people where they are, walking with them. It's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your background. Where do you come from? Tell us about Micah.
I grew up in Atlanta. I was actually born in Alabama, which I lived there for about 8 weeks. Then moved to Atlanta, went to a middle school, or elementary school, middle school, high school, and college, all in the Atlanta area. I studied architecture and was wanting to be an architect very badly. And I was also volunteering I was involved in youth group. And out of that, ended up being a pastor, which was kind of a fluke, and stumbled into something I didn't know that I wanted to do. And I didn't know I could do, and now it's one of the things that's been just one of the most incredible, challenging, growing journeys that I could have ever imagined for myself and my family. I have two. I think you mentioned earlier. I have married my high school sweetheart. We've been married for 32 years.
Yes,
and have two daughters.
Yeah,
She's good. She's good. I have two daughters. One is just like me and one is just like her. And I have to apologize to the one like me all the time. And then she's married to Carson, who's one of my son-in-laws. And then they're the ones they have two daughters also. And then my youngest daughter, Michaela, just got married over the summer. And so we've just had summer was great. We had a new grandbaby and a wedding, and it was just as good of a summer as you could have. So we had a great time.
What an amazing summer. I mean, what are those emotions like, Mike, when you're marrying off your baby girl and you're having a new grandbaby? I mean,
it was wild.
To me seems like emotions I can't even comprehend.
Marrying the second daughter was tough, not because I love him. He's great. He's perfect for her. But something about that, this is my kid. Yeah. Was tough. And then just, it's now you just want to quit work because you got these, all this stuff happening here, but I'm not going to do that yet. So that's the emotions.
That's good. Oh, thank you for that. And what led you to ministry? You said it was like not what you were planning to do.
No.
So is there a story there?
I was working at Chick-fil-A. So I'd worked at the restaurants for 6 years, all the way through high school and college. And they were looking for an architect position in the corporate headquarters in Atlanta. So I got to interview there. My boss, we were a corporate store, the Dwarf House. And so my boss was one of the vice presidents, or our manager of a restaurant was one of the vice presidents. And so he just called me and he's like, hey, we want to do this and I'll get you in. So I had like the shoe in basically, this is back before computers, you had to hand write out your essays. And so I wrote these essays, it's like 20-page application. And one of the questions was, why do you want to work at Chick-fil-A? I'm like, they're Christian values. And in my mind, I'm thinking I can sandwich ministry and this is certainly God's will. Yeah. And so I get there, take the personality test, do all the stuff. I ate lunch with the two architects that were there at the time. I got to meet Truett Cathy and shake his hand. And I go into the HR, the director of HR for my kind of final interview. And he sits down with me and he says, Mike, what do you think God wants you to do with your life? And it's one of those times where the words that came out of my mouth, I just couldn't stop them. And I was like, I think God wants me to be in the ministry. And it's like, as I'm saying this, I'm like, no. I mean, like Chick-fil-A,
It'll work for you.
Right. Yeah. And then he said, well, what are you doing? And I just said, I'm running. Like, I don't want to do it. And then it just turned in, from an interview to like therapy for like the next hour. And I was like, I guess I'm not getting the job. He's like, no, you're not getting the job. And I went back. I was working at another firm in Atlanta at the time. And I just told Julius, I'm going to quit. We'll go to seminary. We'll do whatever. And I ended up with a job offer in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'd never heard of the place. And the pastor was a camp speaker at one of the camps that I had taken. I was a volunteer youth group leader at our church. And so I took our kids to this camp. He was the speaker. He said, why don't you come and interview? I did. And I think I was the only person that would take the job. I think they had like 4 people and everybody turned it down except me. So I ended up in Wilmington in 1993 and was here about 6 years. And then we started Port City and 6 years later. And that was out of—
Oh my goodness.
It was out of like, I had a bunch of kids in my youth group who their families didn't go to church.
Yeah.
And what I found was that most people, they weren't atheists. They just had questions. Mm-hmm. And I didn't necessarily have the answers, but I also could understand, like at least at that point in my life, I understand why questions are so important. I mean, I'd grown up thinking that doubt was like bad. And what I learned was that doubt is actually critical to our faith. Like they go together. And we try to eliminate it by making everything certain, but faith involves that aspect of entering into the unknown and uncertainty and wrestling through those things deeply. And so I did have a curiosity about that. And when we started Port City, it was really, how can we help you kind of take some steps? Yeah. And it just, it's kind of one of those things that just God used and it struck a nerve. And then, the rest is history, like they say. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about both of your books, but in the To Be Concluded, you write about surrender, which is reminiscent of what you're saying right now, because you're saying like when you wrote about it, you said surrender feels like you're giving up something, but you actually get that relief, it sounds like, right?
The thing for me was that, and there is sacrifice. Like I don't want to minimize it. I mean, that's the nature of what the gospel, right? It's self-sacrificing love. That's what love is. It gives of itself. Yeah. So I don't want to minimize that. But in my mind, what it did was sacrifice felt like I can't enjoy anything. And so that was always my upbringing. So to surrender something meant you suck it up and you like deal with it. And as I began to learn how to walk with God, I realized that this idea of offering my life as a living sacrifice was about what I was willing to make available. Could I trust God with my zeal for create things, to build things? Could I trust Him with the way my mind works? Could I trust Him with my relationships? Could I trust Him with these things? Could I trust Him with my provision, with my income, and those types of things? And it's just been a long, slow journey of letting things go and realizing, I can trust Him. He is faithful. And it's in that, I was talking to some kids yesterday. They're like, when does this kind of end? It's like, it never ends. Like it's always, as long as you're doing things that are forward, it's always going to be uncertain. Sure. It's always going to require faith. There's going to be fear. There's going to be the desire to quit, second guess. They never go away. And
if you lean into that doubt, right? If you allow yourself to be in that unknown, that unfamiliar, uncomfortable place. Yeah. And, and I think it's important that you say that because, this is a secular podcast. It's for, business people. Yeah. But I think all people struggle with that, like a meaning of life and what is their purpose and why was I made and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, so I do not a lot, but I do a number of business, settings where I'll go in and talk to a group of business leaders or different things. And I remember, I always ask this question when I was sitting in a group. I was in a real estate group or whatever. And I was like, a bunch of type A go-getters. And I was like, how many of you guys have a to-do list? They're all like, they raised their hands. I got my to-do list. And they're all excited about, checking things off. And I was like, how many of you have a to-be list? And you realize that like, everybody's like, what is that? Like, I've never even considered it. And it's like, you're going to become somebody. Like all the things that are happening to you are going to shape you and form you into a kind of person. And we live as though we don't have a say in that. And we actually do, but a lot of the way our lives get arranged undermines the kind of person that we want to be. And so that's, and when I always ask, I said, everybody knows, whether you're in business, you know that who someone is way more important than what they do. And we just don't have mechanisms to pay attention to those kinds of things. So it translates, I think, well, it's not, everybody who's in business wants people have good character and integrity, and they can be patient, and they can, be generous with themselves to other people. Like, everybody wants those kinds of people.
For sure.
But those don't happen by accident. It's not a natural, wiring. We're most likely to protect ourselves, to get our own way, to step on someone else, to get ahead. I mean, those are just the things that happen to us because we wake up and live in this world. So it takes some work and some way to see that.
Yes. And to ask ourselves, who do I want to be? How do I want to be? And what would I do that would be, emulating or, congruent with that way of being, right? Those are hard questions to ask, but I think really important foundational questions before you do anything else.
Yep. They are.
Right. It's like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I, in your book, you also write about how when people say, tell me about yourself, they often talk about what they do, like their work, right? Not who they are.
Yeah. We answer like that's, and it's drilled into us from the moment where, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And we, and usually with the question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. What do you want to be when you grow up? And you say, oh, I want to be an architect, or I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a teacher. And we're just like almost trained to see our profession and what we do with our work as our identity, and it's not. And so even now, I often, because a lot of times, you meet people, you say, what do you do for a living? I always try to ask people, say, what do you enjoy doing? Like, that's what I try to ask people.
It's a different question.
Just because at least it gets out of, for people who either don't work or don't have jobs they like, it kind of saves the awkwardness. What do you enjoy doing? Everybody can, I like, and they'll tell you, and then it goes from there. But I'm trying to discipline myself not to perpetuate the things that we always value just by kind of default.
Absolutely. Yeah, I catch myself like that if I'm speaking to somebody who's a high school senior or a college senior, really try to avoid that, where are you going or what are you doing next? I mean, that is the most obvious and irritating question to those people.
Especially they don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, what do you love about being a senior? Is such a better question. So in your book, you write, and this is the one word, it's called My One Word, by you and Rachel Olson. And you write about how you choose a word a year. Just tell us the origin of this, and then we'll talk about some of the top 10 words.
So
I'll share some of mine with you.
We were talking earlier. I have kind of my brain doesn't work always the way it's supposed to. I have a little bit of attention problems, and I've always kept a journal. Like I grew up. My youth minister was like, keep a journal, and so I did. And when I was a kid, probably 15, 16. It was fits and starts, and I would try. And, I remember, tracking. So even through college, I kept a little notebook, and I started getting consistent probably my junior year of college. And so I was in 2004, and I'd been at that time pretty diligent about keeping a journal, get up in the morning, do my quiet time, read my Bible, and write down some things. And I remember I was just sick of writing. And I read this verse where Jesus says, in John 7, he said, whoever believes in me, out of his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. And because I went to architecture school, I could draw big, cool bubble letters. So I just took my journal and I wrote across FLOW, and I outlined it and kind of shadowed around it. I just looked at the word. And for the next probably 3 or 4 weeks, I would just go to that page and look at it. And I remember going, I can see so many things about my life where I'm forcing things, where things feel like they're stuck. And it was like I began to say, through this one word, I can start to look at things. So it took a couple more years. And in 2007, I decided that I'm not going to make a New Year's resolution, because I love New Year's resolutions. I'm not going to make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to pick one word. And I invited our whole church to do it, just kind of on a whim.
Yeah.
And my word was finished that year. So I told everybody, this is what I'm doing. And it was like, what kind of person you want to become? And you whittle it down. And I'm not kidding you. I'd be in the grocery store line and someone's like, Mike, my one word is patience. Or I'm in the traffic, people roll their window. My one, everybody's telling me what their word is. And I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And it felt kind of gimmicky. because it's kind of fun and everybody picks a word. And the end of that year, and this is it's what happened. But in December, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine, and his wife he called me and said, my wife, they found shadows on her liver, is what he said. And which meant she was a young mom. So they had 4 kids, like 12 and under. So they were just young. And I go to the hospital to see them. I'd known them really, really well, know them really well. And I went to the hospital, and she, this is a lady who just found out that she's got terminal cancer. And I walk in the room, and she says, I've already picked my word for 2008, and it's moment. I remember thinking, wow, okay, there's something to this. Like, she's going to use this to, to fight for her life and to cherish her life while she fights. And she did it for 3 years. I mean, she picked the words. Her final word was finish. And I was with them driving up to one of the last, efforts to treat her. I was in the back seat with her and her husband. Her husband and her in the front seat, and I was in the back seat with them. And she was talking about just the power of having a sense of personal vision for how she was going to be, even though this was not likely going to end well for her. And, out of that just began to kind of gain some traction. And that's the genesis. And then I started, really kind of trying to mine it to understand, like, what is really, really here? And we're still learning.
Your word this year is quite interesting.
So my word is a Greek word, which I'll probably never pick again, because everybody's always like, what is that? And it's the Greek word kalon, like Kalon, would be the transliteration of it. Yeah. And it's the translation of the word beautiful. But what the story behind it is where Jesus is at Mary's house, or at the lady's house, is what in John, and a lady comes in, or at Lazarus' house, a lady comes in and anoints him with this, takes this jar of perfume and breaks it and pours it out. And the disciples go, "You could have used that money and used that money and fed the poor," which is a very Christian, like that's a good thing, right? You could have taken this money and done something better with it. And Jesus says, don't criticize her. What she has done is a beautiful thing. It's a cologne thing. And it's this idea of offering something that isn't necessarily productive, or if and then it was confirmed. There's an artist. His name is Makoto Fujimura. And he wrote this. I'll read it because I printed it out right here. But he talks about the idea of being generative. And what he says, he talks about generative thinking is critical because we live in a world that is dominated by sort of a scarcity mindset. That there's just not enough, so we better hold on to things. And he says that survival and utility are always the driving forces. And at the very end, he says, generosity has an unexpectedness that can set the context for the renewal of our hearts. An encounter with generosity can remind us that life always overflows our attempts to reduce it to a commodity or a transaction, because it's a gift. Life and beauty are gratuitous in the best sense of the word. And that was where my word came from, because it's this idea that I run our organizations large. There's a lot of things that have to happen, and they need to happen efficiently, and they need to be productive. But I don't want my life to be governed by having to be productive and having to be efficient. I want to be able to learn how to live out of a sense of beauty and offer something beautiful and find things of beauty in all the places that I am. And so that's been the thrust of my word this year, and it's been probably my favorite word. I think this is my 17th word, 18th word. Okay. Yeah, I got them listed out. My journal's in my other room. So so
that's incredible. And like we just talked about with the wedding and the babies, there's been some obvious cologne opportunities, but I think you're saying it's more like those simple, generative, like, how am I a part of this beauty, or how can I just admire it and give gratitude for it? Yeah, that's so important. Thank you for that. So for our listeners to be thinking about what's your one word, it's not too late. And then in lieu of a New Year's resolution, right? Because change is so hard.
It's hard.
Like, we are such creatures of habit. We're going to talk about habit. in a minute, but I think it's helpful to say, like, what if instead I had like this filter that I saw things through? That would be really great.
Part of the thing too, we use the word and say it's a lens, not a promise. Like that's one of the kind of catchphrases, because most people, their approach to change is, I'm going to promise to never do something ever again, or I'm going to promise to always do this. And as soon as you break it, you failed. And with a word, it's just about reorienting your vision. And the reality is our personal vision, the way we see things, is the most important thing that frames how we enter into the world around us and how we contribute to it. And so it's a way to just do that on purpose. That's the goal. Yeah,
that intentionality, that purpose. I love that. So your second book is called To Be Concluded. And for those joining us on YouTube, you can see how the cover is created, where it was continued and now it's concluded. And it says, how to prevent your past from piling up and find hope for your future. I mean, so I think this whole book is about hope, really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the sections of the book are about hope. So chapter 10, I'm jumping ahead. The Power of Disruption. You write this. So I'm just going to read this, your own words to you, and get your reaction here. You said, we have to wage war against regret. That alone is highlighted in my book. We have to disrupt the magnetism of old patterns. We have to do this by being faithful in the moment. When we declare the past will no longer prevent the future by continuing to pile up. Faithfulness in the moment requires us to bring that season to a conclusion, to seize the moment underneath our feet and be faithful in it. It is a thought so freeing that it bears repeating. We break the patterns of the past by choosing to be faithful in the moment. That is what is required of us. Drop the mic. I literally put my book down. I'm like, that's it. So tell us.
I mean, I try to read some of the stuff that I've written frequently to both remind myself of what I have, what I believe, what I trust.
Yeah, sure.
And that's one of the concepts that comes back more and more, because what happens is these patterns establish, like these narratives in our head.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just had this happen last night. People come up to me and they'll say, I'm always anxious. And a lot of times on Sunday, morning, people come up to me and talk to me after the service. And a lot of times there's some people around. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit crazy, and they'll come up a little bit nervous and talk for a minute. Usually can disarm them. I'm kind of a normal person. So we start talking, and I'm always anxious, and we'll go through and tell me what you're anxious about. Well, everything. I'm like, no, give me one specific thing. And we'll start rolling through this. And just a few minutes after they talk, and things kind of settle down, I said, are you anxious right now? And they're like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, then you're not always anxious. Like right now in this moment, you're not anxious. And I said, why? And they'll usually say, because I'm talking. I was like, no, because you have found something, right? And what I believe is grace. You found a sense of the sufficiency of God's grace that is enough for this moment. And what you're going to do is you're going to worry about what's going to happen when you walk out in the parking lot, or what's going to happen tonight or whatever. And the reality is that same grace that's here now will be there then. And what you've got to do is not try to muster enough from this moment to be sufficient for that one. Is you've got to trust that what's available then will actually be there. And when we learn, to me, I say, I'm learning, but as I've learned to live like this, it helps me to navigate like uncertainty, stress, pressure, because, I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to figure out every problem. I don't have to solve every problem. I have to be faithful in the moment that's in front of me, and that I can do. And when you get it down to those places, what you find is you're actually starting to create the kind of future that you long, the kind of future that God has for us and intends for us. And it becomes less dependent on our circumstances and more dependent on what it is that we trust to navigate those circumstances, if that makes sense. That's how I try to.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, and I've heard you describe it, and you have it in here too. That's the grace that we are offered is sufficient for this moment. In this moment, you just said it.
Yep.
And so, and I think you've also described it like breathing.
Like breathing,
right?
yeah.
Like you're not gonna like take in enough oxygen to get you through the next hour. You're just gonna take one breath at a time. So that's a really helpful thing for those who are listening, who are experiencing anxiety or frustration or impatience or whatever it is that they're experiencing, or shame, that they can just take a breath,
Yeah.
right? And
I
really
told
be in
this-
that moment.
this
Is that
kid-
the recommendation you have?
Yeah, I told this guy last night, we were talking, like I said, this just happened. And I asked him, I said, right now you feel like peaceful, right? You feel like the anxiety is not crippling you. He said, no, I actually feel peace. I said, have you felt this, kind of before? He said, yeah. I said, do you ever give yourself credit for it?
Mm.
And he's like, no. I said, right, because the narrative in your head is you're always anxious. So all this gets, but you're not. Like, so you have to be able to find that. So I told him, I said, what I want you to do is I want you to find places of peace where you kind of sense I'm okay. Like, and when you do that, I want you to write it down. And then 3 days from now, I want you to come and show me what you wrote down. I know he'll find it. I know he'll find it. Because he'll go to the beach and he'll find it. You've got to start giving yourself, and I don't want to say credit because that's not exactly the right word, but you have to acknowledge that there are things that are happening that are good and helpful and meaningful. And everything isn't always that way. And the more you start to do it, you start to train there. I use this quote from Kurt Thompson's a psychiatrist, and he said that attention, I'm going to try to get this right. He said our attention is the engine that pulls the thought train of all of our functional thoughts. And if your default thought, if your front thought is, I'm always anxious, what do you think it does to every other thought that follows it? And if you said that anxiety is normal, right? There are things that we should be, that warrant our sense of anxiousness. But if our first thought was, there's a way for me to find peace in this, how might that taint every other thought that follows that? It's what we focus on, pay attention to, is what drives these things.
For sure. And to put some of those pieces together that I've been hearing you say is if the track was on a track towards the way we want to be, like the person we want to become, right? And then if our thoughts are really the engine, then all of that has to be in sync because if like, this is the person I want to become, like I want to be a generous leader. If my thoughts aren't in line with that, it's not improbable, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to get to that destination.
And the most surprising thing is it all begins with the first thought. It's like that first default thought determines whatever train follows. I always joke. So what happens is whenever someone cuts you off in traffic, you have a narrative. Like you know what that person's mama is. Like you know exactly what kind of person
it must be hard to live with them.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I try to do is to say, okay, what if this person's tailing me, my car, and they're riding my tail and they run up behind me next to a stoplight. And in my mind, instead of thinking they're a jerk and whatever, I just said, oh, this person probably goes to Port City. They recognize it's me and they want to get up next to me and say hello. I said, if that's my first thought, how different does my exchange with them at the red light? It's 100% different. Yeah. And it's that, if we can grab that, that's the thing about being faithful in the moment. It's grabbing that one thought and saying, can this direct? And sometimes it's hard because you got to make that moment. Things happen so quick. You got to make it a little bit bigger, be able to say, I'm going to look at this and then I'm going to choose to say, to think this. And, one of the most surprising things to me that I learned early on in my kind of journal or my journey with my brain, with my mind, was that I can actually think my thoughts. That's the reason I started keeping a journal with a lot of diligence, is because this is what I'm thinking. And I can be wrong, I can be incorrect, and I can actually see it and assess it and say, oh, no, that's not right. This is what it should actually be. And it takes the speed of my brain and it slows it down and allows me to see it with a lot more clarity. That's where the habit really started to take root in my own life.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so true. Like, what is the narrative in our minds, the stories we're telling ourselves about situations? And I don't know, for me, it's like I can tell that I'm there by how I feel. Like when I feel like rage or frustration or like indignation or something where this is just wrong. And then I'm like, okay, that's like my first cue because I'm not usually of that mind.
Yep.
So it's like signal.
Yeah. But you think about how easy it is to not be aware of that.
Oh yeah.
And that's what gets most people, sideways because we don't, and there's no mechanism for them to be aware. And that was kind of the idea of my own word, is to give something to people that's like, hey, this is accessible and it's not difficult and you don't have to be a monk to do it. So if you can get this and just get it remotely, it's probably going to be helpful.
Yes. And just to build on that, in the chapter in your book that you talk about captive patterns. You talk about old patterns, our old familiar patterns are concluded not by stopping them, but by creating new patterns. And that's really what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
Right?
Most of that,
like,
that almost never works. I mean, you almost never stop. Something replaces it. There's always a vacuum and something fills it.
Do we have enough time to talk about the encounter foundation expression?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's encounter
this is
formation.
applicable to everyone. It's the formula.
Yeah.
And all of this will be in the show notes so people can dig in and geek out on this more. But if you could just try to simplify that.
So I don't remember where this began, but it's probably been 15, maybe 20 years ago. I wrote this down, and what I've looked at, kind of mostly looking back, this is the way people become who they are. And it's almost universal, regardless if you believe in God or not. It's encounter, formation, expression. Encounter, formation, expression. So what it is encounter is whatever you collide with or see, whatever happens shapes something inside of you. And then whatever happens or is formed inside of you inevitably makes its way out into the way you live your life. So the simplest example, if you're 6 years old, you're walking down the street and a dog comes up to you and you extend your hand out to the dog to pet the dog and the dog bites you, something happens inside of you. And the next time you see a dog, something has been formed in you that's going to determine how you respond the next time or how you respond in that moment. And it's likely fear, and you're likely not to reach out to pet that dog. And, I always kind of say it's one thing when it's like a dog. It's another thing when it's the most foundational relationships that you wanted to trust or needed to trust when you were younger and they disappointed you. Those things formed you. And then it affects how we trust and our willingness to trust. And this happens all the time. It's what we encounter. And so part of, again, it goes back to sort of picking words. I know it sounds overly simplistic, but what we're trying to say is we need to give ourselves a frame to determine what we're going to encounter in the world. And if you just let your mind run, there's just too much stuff, too much distraction, too much pulling us, too much noise to make anything whole happen. And if we can set our minds, our vision, our sights on something and say, this is the kind of person who I want to become, it might be hard. Yeah. But the reality is if you can learn how to encounter and see, and I think it goes back to how we see God and to bear his image. But when we look and we encounter him and let that become the primary formative force, then eventually it's going to make its way out of our lives. People who watch, pick whatever side of the news you want, right? It's forming them. And you can, and the thing is, you can predict how people are going to behave based on what it is that they pay attention to on a regular basis, right? So it's just learning how to encounter things that are going to shape us into the kind of people that we want to become. That's the kind of the secret sauce, if you will, if there is such a thing. So. It's
a really important equation. It is because it kind of goes back to like, what do you want your expression to be?
Right.
Like with that begin with the end in mind, right? How do you want to be? How do you want to influence people? Yeah. So then we've got to take it back to, what are some of the experiences that I want to have so that I can
and
modify.
What are the things that, and what are the things that have affected me? Like what are the things that have, everybody's been formed by something. Yeah. And it's paying attention to those things and learning how, and that's to me, the surprising thing about To Be Concluded was I wrote it to be really practical, and it became more of a kind of a theological, had an angle to it because it talked about this idea of redemption. Mm-hmm. And what most of us do with bad things that happen is we want to wish they never happened or to try to pretend like they didn't. And what I've learned is that the power of redemption we don't have to minimize pain or hardship or difficulty. Those things get brought into our stories as they become these stories. Like redemption requires the hard things. It doesn't overlook them. It requires the pain. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the promise of the gospel and the hope that we have in that. And so it's just helped me to see things with a little bit, honestly, more hope than I've ever had before. And I think things are more off the rails than they've ever been. Yeah. But I still hold this hope because that redemption is possible. Yes. And we just have to work to develop eyes to see it and find it and live it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that hope is also iterated in how you're talking about, if there's something that you have experienced that is painful, or let it die and build something new, right? You don't have to just keep dragging all of this along. Yeah. All right. So are we ready for some rapid fire questions, Mike?
I would love that. I was excited about this.
Okay. All right. All right. So here's some fun ones. What is one of your favorite 80s songs?
The one I was listening to most recently, which was this morning, which is Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears.
That's like
That's a
hands
good
in
one.
the air.
I know.
Yeah, totally. What is one of your favorite worship songs?
Favorite worship song would be Communion. It's by, I don't know who it's by. I can't remember. Stephanie something. I can't remember. It's an older one, but I love that one.
Oh, me too. Best or worst advice you've ever been given?
And the best advice I've ever been given was don't read your own press. And this was back before social media. And he just said, a friend of mine said, Mike, people are going to say things about you, and the nice things are probably just as untrue as the bad things. So just don't read your own press. And now we just have it, it helps now when you see comments and all the other things that people like to do. So that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. That is helpful. Yeah. How about your favorite Disney character and why?
My favorite Disney character is Mitty Bell from Encanto. She reminds me of my oldest daughter. It's just a beautiful story. The very end, it makes me tear up just thinking about how all this was, her gift to the world was. It's a great story. Encanto.
What do you associate with surfing?
Probably it's just a gift. It's one of those things where when you get in the water, everything just gets washed off. You're at the mercy of the ocean. It's beautiful. There's, it's just a gift. That's how I think of it. So I could talk. I could talk forever about that. Yeah.
What is something you're concluding to prevent your past from becoming your future?
I'm going to go back a little bit, and what I had to conclude, there's a list of things, but to make it simple, was this insecurity about feeling like I didn't have anything to offer, which sounds so odd based on what I do, but and what it brought was a sense of I have to step into the voice that I've been given. I don't mean voice like physical, but I mean like what I have to say, what God wants to say through me, and to recognize that it has value, and it's not needed in the sense of, oh, people need this, but it's needed in the sense that God wants to use his people to bring something of himself to the world. And it was a long, slow death of high. And the thing is, insecurity becomes kind of comforting, because then you can blame things and let things go, and you don't have to be responsible for things. So that was something for me. It kind of ushered in a new season in my own life.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's really rich. What is the thing you most easily delight in? This is a question that you asked all of us.
But now it's too easy. It's linen. It's linen. It's these little kids running around my house all the time. Oh, it's so fun. She says, she calls me Pod, P-O-D. And
was that on purpose?
Yes, because I'm young. Well, I feel like I'm young. I'm not as young as I was, but I'm too young to be grand anything. And so my oldest daughter, this is the mother of these two grandkids, Madison. She would, when she was in middle school, she spoke Spanish. She's bilingual, and she would call me Padre, and so I called her Mi Bonita. And so when she would write me notes, she would write M-I, P-O-D, me Pod for short. And so we were picking, grandpa names. I was like, dude, Pod's a lot better than anything else. So we picked Pod. So she'll say,
that's so cool.
I'll walk outside and she'll go, Pod, wait. And it's just the best thing.
Yeah, it's the best thing. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Pod on a podcast. Yes. I love this. What never fails to make you laugh?
Okay. When Buzz Lightyear goes into Spanish mode, never fails to make me laugh.
Those movies are hilarious. Like as an adult watching them, like Cars. Yep. Oh my gosh.
And every time it happens, I laugh like hard. My kids go, Dad, what's wrong with you? I was like, this is funny. It's just funny.
This is so clever. Yep. What do you think is the key to living a good life?
So I told my kids this whenever they started dating. And I tell, when people come to me and say, Mike, we're getting married, what's your one advice? I'm like, just be cool. Like, just be cool. Everything is not worth all the emotion you feel. Just be cool. And the highs are great and you get to enjoy them. The lows are hard but it all comes. You're going to have both, and you just got to be cool and not let either one be more than they need to be. And that's probably what helps me the most.
Yeah, be enough.
Yeah.
How do you want to be remembered?
I think at the end of it all, I hope that I'll be remembered as just being real or authentic. You want to be remembered as like clever, but I think if people just knew that I was actually trying to become the person that you see and interact with, that would be the best thing to be remembered by.
Oh yeah. Well, you're doing it. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of our guests talked about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues.
Oh, wow.
And that's what you're talking about. And that's really helpful. Like it goes back to like the, who do you want to become? Yeah. So yeah, you're right on point with that. So here's a couple of key takeaways. There's a million of them, but here's a couple. Reach is what you care about.
Yep.
So think about what you care about. Create your to-be list. Very practical, harder to do than to say. Keep a journal. Choose your one word. Be generative. Break old patterns. Find your peace. Like, where is it that you find peace? Like, track that. How do you become who you are through encounter, foundation, and expression? And be cool.
That's it. There you go.
Drop the mic.
That's so good.
Yes. Well, thank you for being you, Mike. I so appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having it has been such a joy to be a part of this. I mean, from all the pre, and I said that to you earlier, all the things you did to prepare for this, and then to be here today, it really was a pleasure and an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G, Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.